Commander Hyun stared at the massive holographic display, showing his fleet stretched across space like a deadly constellation. 847 warships moved in perfect formation, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent energy. Each vessel was a living weapon, grown rather than built, capable of healing battle damage and adapting to enemy tactics. This was the pride of the Vorthak Empire, an armada that had never known defeat. Admiral Nara, report on our target species. Hyun commanded, his four eyes scanning the tactical readouts with practiced efficiency. His second-in-command approached with the swagger of someone who had witnessed countless victories. "These humans are laughably primitive, Commander," Nara replied, her tentacles dancing across the control interface. "Our scouts report they still use crude metal projectiles fired from chemical propulsion systems. Their defensive capabilities consist of basic energy shields that our plasma cannons can penetrate within seconds. Most amusing of all, they've only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century." Hyun's mandibles clicked in amusement. The Vorthak had been traveling between stars for over 10,000 years. Their empire stretched across 3 galaxy arms, encompassing hundreds of conquered worlds. Each species they encountered followed the same predictable pattern: initial resistance, desperate last stands, and finally complete submission to Vorthak rule. The intelligence data scrolled across multiple screens, painting a picture of a young civilization barely crawling out of its home star system. Human settlements existed on only 12 worlds, their population numbering in the mere billions, rather than the trillions that marked a truly advanced species. Their technology relied on primitive nuclear fusion and electromagnetic manipulation. 47 species have fallen before us using the exact same conquest protocols, Hyun mused, reviewing their military doctrine. The strategy was elegant, in its simplicity: overwhelming force, superior technology, and psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. Lieutenant Dai approached with the communication array activated. "Commander, shall I broadcast the standard surrender demand?" "Proceed," Hyun ordered, settling back into his command throne. The ultimatum had been refined over centuries of conquest. It offered the target species 2 choices: immediate surrender and integration into the Vorthak Empire as a client race, or complete annihilation. Most civilizations chose survival over pride. The message transmitted across all human communication frequencies simultaneously. Hyun imagined the panic spreading through their primitive settlements as they realized the futility of resistance. Human military vessels would scramble desperately, their commanders frantically calculating impossible odds against the Vorthak Armada. Their response should arrive within 6 standard time units, Nara reported. Based on previous conquests, we estimate a 78% probability of immediate surrender. The remaining 22% typically involves token resistance lasting less than 1 planetary rotation. Hyun nodded approvingly. Another easy victory to add to their empire's expanding borders. The humans would provide useful genetic material for their bioengineering programs, and their worlds contained several rare minerals valuable to Vorthak industry. Within a few cycles, this entire star system would be producing resources for the Empire's continued expansion. The waiting began, but Hyun felt no anxiety. After all, what could one primitive species possibly do against the might of the Vorthak Empire? The communication array crackled to life 6 hours after the ultimatum was sent, but what came through left the entire Vorthak command bridge in stunned silence. Commander Hyun expected either terrified pleas for mercy or defiant threats of resistance. Instead, the transmission began with something completely unexpected: a complex mathematical proof, solving a theoretical physics problem that had puzzled Vorthak scientists for generations. "What in the void is this?" Admiral Nara muttered, her tentacles recoiling from the display as equations cascaded across the screen. The mathematics was elegant, beautiful even, demonstrating an understanding of quantum mechanics that rivaled their own advanced civilization. Captain Minho hunched over his analysis station, his bio-enhanced brain struggling to process the incoming data stream. "Commander, this transmission contains multiple data packets. The mathematical proofs are followed by audio files of some kind. the bridge filled with haunting melodies unlike anything in Vorthak culture. Human music flowed through their speakers, ranging from thunderous orchestral pieces that made their exoskeletons vibrate to gentle acoustic arrangements that somehow conveyed deep emotion. The aliens found themselves unconsciously swaying to rhythms that shouldn't have affected their psychology. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Suna whispered, her translation algorithms working overtime. "They're sending us artistic expressions alongside tactical information. Look at these star charts. They're not just showing us their defensive positions, they're highlighting the most beautiful stellar phenomena in their territory." The transmission continued with detailed technical specifications of human vessels, but presented in a way that emphasized engineering elegance rather than military capability. Blueprints were accompanied by philosophical essays about the relationship between form and function. Even their weapon designs came with historical context about human conflicts and the lessons learned from each war. Hyun's 4 eyes focused on the cultural section of the message. Humans had included literature samples, visual art, and even recipes for something called coffee, apparently a psychoactive beverage they consumed for pleasure rather than survival. The diversity was staggering. Where Vorthak culture had evolved toward unity and conformity, humans seemed to celebrate endless variation. "Commander," Minho called out, his voice uncertain. "They've also transmitted what appears to be a complete linguistic database. They want us to understand not just their words, but the cultural context behind their expressions." The most bewildering part came at the end. Instead of accepting the surrender terms or issuing counter-threats, the humans extended an invitation. They proposed a cultural exchange program where representatives from both species could meet on neutral ground to share knowledge, art, and perspectives before any military action was considered. "They want to have a conversation before we potentially kill each other," Suna translated, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're treating this like a diplomatic opportunity rather than a conquest scenario." Admiral Nara's mandibles clicked nervously. "This has to be a deception. No species responds to an invasion threat with poetry and dinner recipes. They're obviously trying to buy time to prepare their defenses." But Hyun wasn't so certain. The transmission's complexity suggested a level of cognitive sophistication that didn't match their intelligence reports. The humans weren't just sending random information. They were painting a picture of who they were as a species, what they valued, and how they viewed the universe around them. "Maintain standard invasion protocols," Hyun ordered, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "But continue analyzing their cultural data. I want to understand what we're truly dealing with." The asteroid belt had been quiet for hours when the proximity alarm suddenly screamed across the Vorthak flagship. Commander Hyun's attention snapped to the tactical display as a single contact emerged from behind a massive space rock, moving with deliberate purpose toward their armada. "Contact identified," reported the sensor operator, his voice tinged with confusion. "Single vessel, human registry UES Defiant, mass approximately 2 kilometers in length, 1 kilometer in width." Admiral Nara leaned forward, studying the incoming ship with growing bewilderment. Where Vorthak vessels flowed like living creatures with smooth curves and organic integration, this human ship looked like someone had assembled a collection of metal boxes and welded them together. Angular edges jutted out at harsh angles, with no consideration for aesthetic beauty or biological harmony. "It looks like a floating industrial complex," Captain Wu observed from his position at the tactical station. "There's no elegance to the design whatsoever. It's all function over form, built purely for utility." Engineer Gina's tentacles danced frantically over her instrument panel as strange readings flooded her screens. "Commander, I'm detecting energy signatures that don't match any propulsion system in our databases. The power output is enormous, but it's not following conventional fusion or antimatter patterns." The human ship continued its approach at a steady pace, neither rushing into battle nor attempting to flee. Its movement suggested confidence rather than desperation, as if a single vessel facing nearly 1,000 enemies was perfectly normal. The hull appeared to be constructed from layers of different materials, with obvious repair sections and retrofitted components visible even at this distance. Analysis of the vessel structure shows multiple redundant systems, Gina continued, her voice growing more puzzled. They have backup systems for their backup systems. Every critical component appears to be protected by at least 3 layers of redundancy. Hyun studied the approaching ship with growing unease. The design philosophy was completely alien to Vorthak thinking. Their ships were grown as single organisms, elegant and efficient. This human vessel looked like it had been built to survive. Anything the universe could throw at it, regardless of how ugly it became in the process. Weapons analysis? Nara demanded. That's the strange part, Wu replied, manipulating the tactical display to highlight various sections of the human ship. I can identify what appear to be weapon systems, but they're integrated into the hull. Structure in ways I've never seen. Some of these installations look like they could be mining equipment repurposed for combat. The Defiance communication array activated, transmitting on all frequencies. A human voice, calm and professional, filled the Vorthak bridge. Vorthak Fleet, this is Captain Lee of the UES Defiant. We're here to discuss the terms of your withdrawal from human space. Please respond when you're ready to negotiate. The audacity of the statement left the alien command staff speechless. A single ship was demanding that an entire invasion fleet retreat, spoken with the same tone someone might use to discuss dinner plans. Sir, the communications officer reported nervously, they're not requesting backup or calling for reinforcements. All human military channels remain silent except for this one vessel. Hyun's mandibles clicked in frustration. Every aspect of this encounter defied his understanding of military logic. One ship against hundreds should mean immediate surrender or desperate flight, not calm negotiation demands. Prepare the forward squadrons for engagement, he ordered. Let's see what this primitive defender can actually accomplish. The moment the UES Defiant powered up its weapons, every sensor on the Vorthak flagship began screaming warnings that made no scientific sense. Science Officer Kang stared at his instruments in disbelief, watching readings that violated everything he thought he knew about the universe. Commander, something impossible is happening, Kang reported, his voice shaking. The space around the human vessel was bending. Gravity fields are forming where there should be vacuum. The fabric of reality itself appears to be warping. On the main display, the human ship began to glow with an eerie blue light that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. What the Vorthak had initially dismissed as crude metal construction now revealed itself as something far more sophisticated. The blocky exterior wasn't primitive design. It was housing for technology that defied comprehension. Admiral Nara watched in growing horror as her instruments detected gravitational waves emanating from the Defiant's weapon systems. Those readings can't be correct. You'd need the mass of a small star to generate gravitational effects that strong. The readings are accurate, Kang confirmed, his tentacles trembling as he recalibrated his sensors for the 3rd time. The humans aren't just firing projectiles. They're manipulating the fundamental forces of physics to accelerate matter beyond what should be theoretically possible. Commander Hyun observed the tactical display with dawning comprehension and terror. The Defiant's weapons weren't following conventional physics. Instead of simple kinetic energy, the human ship was creating localized distortions in space-time itself. Matter was being accelerated not by chemical propulsion or electromagnetic fields, but by warping the very structure of reality around the projectiles. Sir, their mass drivers are achieving velocities that approach significant fractions of light speed, reported Captain Wu, his voice barely above a whisper. But they're doing it without the energy requirements that such acceleration should demand. It's as if they've found a way to cheat physics itself. The first demonstration came without warning. The Defiant fired a single projectile, nothing more than a chunk of refined metal, but the space around it twisted and folded like fabric being stretched. What should have been a simple ballistic trajectory became something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Impact prediction impossible, Wu announced. The projectile is following a path that doesn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Our defensive systems can't track something that's moving through folded space-time. The projectile struck one of their forward scout ships, but the impact was unlike anything in Vorthak military experience. Instead of simply penetrating the hull, the kinetic energy release created a cascade reaction that seemed to multiply the destructive force exponentially. The scout ship didn't just explode. It seemed to collapse in on itself before expanding outward in a brilliant flash. "How is this possible?" Nara demanded, her bio-neural implants struggling to process the impossible physics readings. "Matter cannot be accelerated to those velocities without massive energy input. The power requirements alone should exceed the output of their entire star system." Kang's analysis grew more disturbing with each passing moment. "Commander, they're not following our understanding of energy conservation. They appear to be borrowing energy from space-time itself, using gravitational manipulation to create closed loops that violate thermodynamic principles." Hyun realized with growing dread that everything the Vorthak Empire knew about warfare had just become obsolete. The humans weren't just using advanced technology. They were rewriting the rules of reality itself. Where other species worked within the constraints of physics, humans seemed to view universal constants as inconvenient suggestions to be overcome through engineering ingenuity. "All ships maintain distance," Hyun ordered, his voice hollow with the weight of implication. "We're not facing conventional weapons. We're facing a species that treats the laws of physics as an engineering challenge to be solved." Intelligence. Analyst Hana had been monitoring human communication channels for hours when she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. Buried within routine maintenance reports and crew schedules were casual conversations that revealed the terrifying truth about humanity's origins. "Commander Hyun, you need to hear this," Hana called out, her voice tight with concern. She activated the translation matrix, letting intercepted human voices fill the bridge of the Vorthak flagship. The first conversation was between two human engineers discussing routine repairs. "Remember when we hunted mammoth across the ice sheets for days without stopping? This patrol duty is nothing compared to that. We can keep this ship running for months without resupply if we have to." Admiral Nara's tentacles coiled nervously. They're talking about their prehistoric ancestors like they personally experienced it. What kind of species maintains that level of cultural memory? More transmissions followed, each one painting a picture of humanity's brutal evolutionary path. Humans had evolved on a world that seemed designed to kill them. Extreme weather, dangerous predators, and scarce resources had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that viewed hardship as normal and survival as a personal responsibility. "Listen to this," Hana continued, playing another intercept. A human captain was briefing his crew. "Our ancestors chased prey across continents until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't have claws or fangs or armor plating. We had something better. We never gave up. That's still our greatest weapon." Captain Yoon studied the technical schematics they'd captured from human databases, and suddenly everything made sense. "Look at their ship construction philosophy. Every critical system has not just one backup, but multiple redundant backups. They design their vessels expecting catastrophic failure." The human approach to engineering was completely alien to Vorthak thinking. Where the Empire's bioships were elegant and efficient, human vessels were built like fortresses. Each component was designed to survive in isolation if everything around it failed. Power systems could reroute through dozens of different pathways. Life support had enough redundancy to maintain crew survival even with 70% system failure. "They don't build ships," Yoon realized with growing dread. "They build survivors." More intercepted communications revealed humanity's approach to warfare. Unlike the Vorthak Empire's strategy of overwhelming force and quick victory, humans planned for extended campaigns that could last years or even decades. Their logistics networks were designed to support military operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. "Sir, their military doctrine is based on something they call learning through conflict," Hana reported. "Every war they've fought has been analyzed, studied, and integrated into their tactical philosophy. They don't just fight battles, they evolve through them." The most disturbing revelation came from human historical records. Their species had spent thousands of years fighting each other, refining their understanding of warfare through constant conflict. Every weapon system, every defensive strategy, every tactical innovation had been tested, not in simulations, but in actual combat against opponents who were equally intelligent and motivated. They've been preparing for us their entire evolutionary history, Admiral Nara whispered. Not specifically for the Vorthak Empire, but for any threat that might challenge their survival. It's hardwired into their DNA. Commander Hyun absorbed this information with growing unease. The Vorthak Empire conquered through superior technology and coordinated attacks. But humans had evolved to survive impossible odds through sheer persistence and adaptive learning. They weren't just another species to be conquered. They were the product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure that had created the perfect survivors. They don't view this as a conquest scenario, Hyun realized. To them, this is just another survival challenge to overcome. Tactical Officer Dana expected the human vessel to engage in traditional ship-to-ship combat, but what happened next shattered every assumption about space warfare. Instead of targeting the Vorthak fleet directly, the UES Defiant began moving toward the asteroid belt with purposeful determination. "What are they doing?" Admiral Nara demanded, watching the tactical display with growing confusion. "They're moving away from us, not positioning for attack." The answer came within minutes, as the human ship's gravitational manipulators activated on a scale that defied belief. Asteroids that had been drifting peacefully in their orbits for millions of years suddenly began changing course, pulled by invisible forces that the Defiant was somehow generating. "Commander, they're not just moving rocks," Dana reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're calculating precise trajectories to create a cascade effect. One asteroid collision is triggering others, creating a chain reaction of debris moving at incredible velocities." The Vorthak fleet watched in horror as their enemy transformed the entire star system into a weapon. What had been empty space between planets became a shooting gallery of high-velocity projectiles, each one guided by the human ship's impossible physics manipulation. Captain Wu frantically tried to update their defensive formations, but traditional military tactics became meaningless when the battlefield itself was being redesigned. "Sir, our standard formations assume static space conditions. The humans are making space itself dynamic. They're turning the entire system into their ammunition supply." The Defiant's next move was even more audacious. Using focused gravitational fields, the human ship began redirecting solar radiation from the star itself. Concentrated beams of stellar energy were being bent and focused like light through a magnifying glass, creating devastating energy weapons with virtually unlimited ammunition. "This is impossible," Nara whispered, watching streams of solar plasma being manipulated across millions of kilometers of space. "You can't just redirect stellar output. The energy requirements alone should destroy any ship attempting such manipulation." But the humans weren't finished with their tactical innovation. Every piece of space debris, from microscopic dust particles to destroyed satellite fragments, was being accelerated and guided with surgical precision. The Vorthak fleet found themselves dodging not just asteroid impacts, but swarms of hypervelocity debris that could penetrate their bioorganic hulls. Dana realized with growing terror that the humans weren't fighting a space battle. They were conducting a symphony of destruction, using an entire star system as their instrument. "Commander, they're not targeting our ships individually. They're creating kill zones throughout the system. Anywhere we position our fleet becomes a trap." The most disturbing aspect was the human ship's apparent ability to maintain these massive gravitational manipulations without showing any signs of power depletion. While Vorthak vessels would have exhausted their energy reserves attempting even a fraction of what the Defiant was accomplishing, the human ship continued operating as if bending physics was routine maintenance. "Their tactical doctrine doesn't recognize the difference between weapons and environment," Captain Yoon observed. "To them, everything in the system is a potential tool for warfare. Asteroids, solar radiation, gravitational fields, even the vacuum of space itself." Admiral Nara's carefully orchestrated battle formations became not just useless, but actively dangerous. Ships that maintained tight formations found themselves trapped in gravitational wells created by the human vessel. Scattered formations became vulnerable to coordinated asteroid bombardments that seemed to come from every direction simultaneously. "Order all ships to random evasive patterns," Hyun commanded. But even as he spoke, he knew it was futile. The humans had turned the entire star system into their weapon, and traditional military thinking had no answer for an enemy that treated physics as raw material for tactical advantage. The change began subtly, like a whisper spreading through the vast Vorthak Armada. Communications Officer Inho noticed it first as routine tactical chatter between ships gradually diminished to scattered, uncertain exchanges. The confident military, protocols that had coordinated 47 successful conquests, were breaking down into something the Empire had never experienced before. "Commander Hyun, I'm detecting unusual patterns in our fleet communications," Inho reported, his bioneural implants flickering with confusion. "Ship commanders are requesting clarification on engagement protocols, but they're not waiting for responses. They're just asking the same questions over and over." The Vorthak collective consciousness operated on shared instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. Their ancestors had been apex predators on their homeworld, creatures that dominated through swift, decisive action and overwhelming force. Every conquest had followed the same pattern: identify prey, overwhelm with superior numbers, claim victory. But the human vessel had introduced something their evolutionary programming couldn't process. Captain Bora monitored the tactical networks and noticed something deeply disturbing. "Sir, our ship commanders are experiencing what I can only describe as analysis paralysis. They're encountering a predator that doesn't fit any category in their bioneural databases." Across the fleet, Vorthak minds were struggling with an impossible contradiction. The UES Defiant was clearly outnumbered 800 to 1, yet it was dictating the terms of engagement. Traditional predator-prey relationships didn't account for prey that transformed the environment itself into a weapon. Their collective consciousness, evolved for quick decisions and rapid strikes, was jamming like a computer, trying to process contradictory code. "The silence is spreading," Inho observed with growing unease. "Communication channels that should be buzzing with tactical coordination are going quiet. It's not equipment failure. The commanders simply aren't talking to each other anymore." The phenomenon was unprecedented in Vorthak military history. Individual ship captains, normally linked through their bioneural networks into a seamless command structure, were becoming isolated islands of uncertainty. Each commander was reaching the same terrifying conclusion independently. Everything they understood about warfare had become obsolete in the span of minutes. Admiral Nara attempted to restore coordination through direct neural commands, but even her own thought processes were becoming sluggish and uncertain. "I can feel it myself," she admitted quietly. "When I try to formulate attack strategies, my mind keeps returning to the same question: what if nothing we do works?" The collective hesitation was spreading through the fleet like a virus. Ships that should have been maneuvering into attack, formations remained stationary, their commanders paralyzed by the realization that they were facing something beyond their evolutionary comprehension. The humans weren't just using superior technology. They were operating according to principles that the Vorthak biological programming couldn't categorize. Captain Bora studied the communication logs with growing alarm. "Commander, this isn't just tactical confusion. Our bioneural networks are experiencing something analogous to what ancient prey species must have felt when they first encountered us. The predator-prey dynamic has reversed, and our collective consciousness can't adapt fast enough." The eerie silence that had begun with scattered units was now encompassing entire battle groups. 847 warships hung motionless in space, their crews trapped between evolutionary instincts that demanded immediate action and rational minds that recognized the futility of conventional tactics. "We're experiencing doubt," Commander Hyun realized with profound shock. "For the first time in our species' history, we're uncertain whether we can win. Our collective consciousness is freezing because it has no framework for processing voluntary retreat from inferior numbers." The frozen moment stretched across space as thousands of Vorthak warriors grappled with an emotion their species had forgotten existed: the fear of being outmatched by a superior predator. The revelation hit Commander Hyun like a physical blow as he stared at the tactical displays showing the human vessel calmly repositioning asteroids across millions of kilometers of space. Everything the Vorthak Empire represented Everything they had built their galactic dominance upon had just become as obsolete as stone tools in the face of nuclear weapons. "They're not warriors," Hyun whispered, his four eyes reflecting the eerie glow of the tactical screens. "They're engineers who happen to be at war." The distinction was crucial and terrifying. The Vorthak had evolved as biological predators, creatures whose military success came from superior instincts, faster reflexes, and overwhelming physical force. Their entire approach to conquest was based on the simple formula that had worked for millions of years. Be bigger, be stronger, be more aggressive than your prey. But humans operated on completely different principles. They didn't rely on biological advantages or evolutionary superiority. Instead, they approached conflict like a massive engineering problem to be solved through innovation, adaptation, and the systematic application of scientific principles. Where the Vorthak saw warfare, humans saw applied physics. Admiral Nara's bioneural implants were overheating as she tried to process the implications. "Commander, our entire military doctrine assumes that superior numbers and firepower guarantee victory. But what happens when the enemy can turn the laws of physics themselves into weapons?" Throughout the massive fleet, similar realizations were occurring simultaneously. Ship commanders who had spent their careers perfecting traditional combat maneuvers found themselves facing an opponent that didn't recognize the existence of traditional combat. The humans weren't playing by the same rules because they had rewritten the rulebook entirely. Captain Bora monitored the fleet's bioneural networks and watched something unprecedented happening in real time. "Sir, I'm detecting what can only be described as a species-wide cognitive crisis. Our collective consciousness is trying to categorize humans as either predator or prey, but they don't fit either classification." The frozen moment stretching across space wasn't just tactical indecision. It was evolutionary programming encountering something it had no framework to understand. Every Vorthak mind was simultaneously arriving at the same impossible conclusion. They had found a species that had transcended the biological limitations of warfare. "Look at how they're using that single ship," Captain Wu observed, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. "They're not trying to outfight us or intimidate us. They're demonstrating capabilities that make fighting irrelevant. It's like watching someone casually juggle suns while discussing dinner plans." The human approach to conflict was methodical rather than emotional, systematic rather than instinctive. They had taken the chaotic randomness of warfare and transformed it into a predictable engineering discipline. Every action the UES Defiant took seemed calculated not just for immediate tactical advantage, but as part of a larger strategic framework that operated on scales the Vorthak couldn't comprehend. They're treating this entire encounter as a proof of concept, Hyun realized with growing awe and terror. This isn't them showing off their most powerful weapons. This is them demonstrating their basic capabilities to an audience they're trying to educate. The most disturbing aspect was the casual nature of the human ship's demonstrations. The UES Defiant was reshaping reality around itself with the same routine efficiency that Vorthak vessels used for basic navigation. What should have been impossible? Feats of engineering were being performed like routine maintenance procedures. "We can't fight them," Admiral Nara admitted, her voice barely audible. "How do you wage war against a species that treats the fundamental forces of the universe as construction materials?" The Armada remained motionless, 847 ships trapped in a moment of collective realization that their entire understanding of power, dominance, and galactic hierarchy had just been fundamentally challenged by creatures who approached warfare like mathematicians solving equations. The withdrawal began without any formal announcement or dramatic declarations. One by one, Vorthak ships simply began powering down their weapon systems and adjusting their positions away from the human vessel. It wasn't retreat in the traditional military sense. It was more like a collective recognition that the fundamental assumptions underlying their presence had become invalid. Commander Hyun watched his fleet's gradual repositioning with a mixture of relief and profound uncertainty. For the first time in Vorthak military history, an invasion was ending not because of victory or defeat, but because the concept of invasion itself had become meaningless in the face of what they had witnessed. Sir, the human vessel is maintaining its position but has ceased all aggressive demonstrations, reported Captain Wu. They're not pursuing our withdrawal or demanding surrender terms. They're just waiting. The UES Defiant hung in space like a patient teacher, having delivered its lesson without malice or triumphalism. The asteroid formations it had orchestrated continued their new trajectories, a permanent reminder that the star system itself had been transformed according to human will. Yet there was no sense of threat in the ship's posture, only quiet competence. Admiral Nara approached the communications console with steps that felt heavier than her actual weight. The transmission she was about to send would mark a historical turning point for the Vorthak Empire, though she wasn't sure whether it represented evolution or surrender. Human vessel UES Defiant, this is Admiral Nara of the Vorthak Imperial Fleet, she began, her voice carrying across the void between species. We formally accept your original proposal for cultural exchange. We request permission to establish diplomatic contact for the purpose of learning. The pause before the word learning carried the weight of an empire's shattered certainty. The Vorthak had always been the teachers in galactic encounters, imposing their understanding upon lesser species. Now they found themselves in the unfamiliar position of students facing a curriculum they couldn't even comprehend. Captain Lee's response came through their speakers with the same calm professionalism he had maintained throughout the encounter. Admiral Nara, we welcome your interest in cultural exchange. We'll establish a neutral meeting point within the week. We look forward to sharing perspectives on engineering, philosophy, and the interesting ways different species approach problem-solving. The casual mention of problem-solving sent a chill through the Vorthak command staff. They realized that their invasion had been viewed not as an existential threat, but as an interesting engineering challenge that humans had solved with characteristic methodical efficiency. Fleet withdrawal to Rally Point 7, Commander Hyun ordered, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone whose worldview had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt within a few hours. All ships are to compile complete records of this encounter for strategic analysis. As the vast Armada began its journey away from human space, conversations throughout the fleet centered on a single, transformative question. What did it mean to be an apex predator in a galaxy where humans treated the laws of physics as suggestions to be improved upon? The intelligence reports that would reach the Vorthak homeworld would challenge everything their civilization believed about power, dominance, and their place in the cosmic hierarchy. They had encountered a species that didn't seek to conquer the galaxy through superior force, but seemed content to quietly demonstrate that conquest itself was an obsolete concept. Commander, Admiral Nara said as their flagship adjusted course for home, what do we tell the Empire Council about what we found out here? Hyun looked one last time at the tactical display, showing the UES Defiant returning to its patient orbit around human colonies. We tell them that we found something that changes everything. We tell them that the galaxy just became a much more interesting and complicated place.